For disabled people generally. Next story, the street-level dealers have been locked up in a huge sweep. This is in Bristol 24/7 by Emanuel on 29th of January. More than 60 street-level drug dealers from across Bristol have been locked up for a total of 181 years in one of the largest police operations of its kind in the city. Sentences handed out at Bristol Crown Court on Friday marked the end of a massive sweep where undercover officers caught dealers on cameras before a series of dawn raids in November last year. The general principle here is it's a street level dealers, and if you go on to Bristol 24/7 website, Jane, you'll find there's loads and loads of comments on there where people are just saying, well, this is a complete waste of time because in a few seconds, you know, there's going to be another person who's going to take the job of those street dealers. I also noticed, looking at a list of the people who'd been convicted, something like half of them were no fixed abode, homeless people.
Yeah, well, I think that's, that, for me, that's the main thing about the story, that, you are solving one problem, but, immediately all, their replacements will spring up. And you've got to look at the reasons for why they're getting into this sort of crime in the first place. Surely it's because of lack of opportunities, employment. Maybe there's lots of reasons for these things, and they're not being taken into account. They're just plonking them in prison, which is actually a training ground for more criminal activity. It's not something that's a solution. And it's like, yes, get them off the streets now. Obviously we don't want that, but we need to have a bit more of a bigger picture approach to it.
Well, Martin,
not really the answer.
Even Oliver Cosgrove, he's the temporary chief inspector who led the operation, he says certainly there's always a danger that when you send a lot of drug dealers to prison, there's a lot of people who are going to want to fill that void.
Well, that's what happened a few years ago when they slept up the front line in St Paul's, and then a new gang of lads took over, and then the other lads came out of prison, and it turned into a shooting match. The real problem is that drugs shouldn't be illegal, and the real problem also is that the financial services sector is totally dependent on the illegal drugs market. There's a report by the UN Office on Drugs and Crime which came out in 2009, staffed by police officers from all over the world, and they said, you know what happened last year when the financial crisis happened? All the drug dealers on the planet rushed to the banks and said, do you want some money? And they all said, yes, please, thanks very much. And HSBC had been convicted in the courts in the United States of America of money laundering for the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico, which is actually aligned with the CIA.
And funding terrorism as well.
And funding terrorism, well, of course, but that was just to do with money for the Iranians. But, I mean, the point is that the illegal drugs trade is essential to the financial services industry. The banks would have collapsed without it. The CIA have been involved in it for years. People will remember Colonel Oliver North, who used to be Reagan's fixer. He was definitely involved in bringing massive amounts of cocaine into the United States of America through the Mena Air Base in Arkansas, which was actually, Arkansas at that time was being run by Bill Clinton, so he got a kick off on it. And of course it was the Reagan administration that were running all of this, and they flooded the cities of the western East Coast with crack cocaine in order to fund an illegal terrorist war in Nicaragua against the democratically elected government of Nicaragua, who won 2 democratic elections, and an illegal terrorist war killed 30,000 civilians, mostly nursery workers and nurses and other people of that kind. And the CIA have been in it up to their eyeballs for years. So they began dealing drugs in the 1940s to try and make sure the nationalists won the war in the civil war in China.
So are you saying you think these arrests maybe should have been made a little bit further up the chain?
The point is that this is absolutely irrelevant. But people will come back, and it won't make any difference to the ability of people to buy drugs on the streets of Bristol. I absolutely guarantee you that. It makes no difference whatsoever. We've got to actually have an adult conversation about this.
So why are the police doing this then? If it's not
because on the statute book it says that these things are illegal activities, and therefore they've got to go around and do something about it. And we've actually got to change our attitude to us. There's no Lord Green, who was the head of HSBC. When they were convicted in the courts in the US.
Chairman,
yeah. He was far from being prosecuted. He was actually appointed to the cabinet as Cameron's advisor on tax and tax avoidance. That was his punishment for HSBC being money laundering for the Sinaloa. And what they were doing in Mexico, they'd actually altered their banking facilities so that there were places where you could put full briefcases full of money straight through into the thing without having to take it out and count it first. And they'd actually completely changed all of the internal structure of the banks that they were running in Mexico, so that people just walk in and hand over a suitcase full of money. The financial services sector is totally dependent on the illegal drugs trade is bigger than the car industry.
Okay, so who are the real big guys then that the police in Avon and Somerset police should have gone for?
Well, what about Lord Green for starters? I mean, basically, the whole of the financial services sector is deeply implicated in the drugs trade.
Well, aren't the...
they should all be arrested anyway.
Martin, aren't
for
the
other
intelligence services doing something about this?
No, the intelligence services are deeply involved in it. I just mentioned the CIA's involvement in what was going on.
What about here in Britain? There's no evidence of that,
MI6
surely.
are closely allied with the CIA. The CIA are drug dealers. MI6 are also drug dealers. They are funding the war in Syria, partly through drugs being transmitted via Kosovo Liberation Army, very much a CIA MI6 front organisation. They are major heroin traffickers. The heroin industry in Afghanistan, which had been closed down by the Taliban, has been put back in business. They are now the biggest suppliers of heroin in the world. And Walid Karzai, who was the brother of Hamid Karzai, who was the imposed puppet president of Afghanistan, he was assassinated, and he was working with the CIA. He was on the CIA payroll, also the biggest drug dealer in Afghanistan. And of course, we actually defeated the Russians in Afghanistan in the 1980s by allowing them. The Mujahideen in Afghanistan, helped by the SAS, the CIA, MI6, they funded themselves through putting people into selling heroin on the streets of Bristol, which was the money for that then went to Afghanistan to kill Russian conscript soldiers. That's the facts. That's the reality. And we've got to legalise drugs, not because drugs are good for you, but because the dirty money associated with drugs has completely corrupted whole countries like Colombia and Mexico. And everybody in those countries knows that certain cartels, the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico, for example, the Cali cartel in Colombia, are working with the CIA. And so what they then do is they then use the Drug Enforcement Administration and all the police and everything to take down the opposition to the politically favoured drug cartels who are working with the intelligence services. So when you say the intelligence services, aren't they doing something about this, it makes me laugh. Because in actual fact, all the evidence shows that they've been deeply implicated in this for years and years and years. The head of MI6 should probably be put on trial for drug dealing. He won't be, will he?
Interesting, Martin. Certainly fascinating insight, and contrasted to the 30 or so, it looks like homeless people who've been jailed because of this raid. Fascinating. Let's go on to have a little listen back to Wednesday's Prime Minister's questions now, because apparently